Sometimes fate don't knock. It crashes in with thunder, mud, and headlights in the pouring rain. It was just supposed to be another storm. Another wild Montana evening, the kind that rattles old barns and floods back roads. But for Caleb Ryder, that night turned into something else entirely. He saw her out there, soaked, stranded, waving for help, like her life depended on it. And maybe it did. He pulled over, no hesitation. Because that's just who he is. A man built by fire, forged in smoke, and softened by the soil he now calls home. But what he didn't know was who she really was. And what followed wasn't just gratitude or even danger. It was a knock on the door that came with boots, uniforms, and blacked-out SUVs. This ain't a love story, and it ain't quite a war story either. It's the kind of tale that makes you wonder how many lives you've already touched without even knowing it. So don't just listen halfway, because by the time the storm clears, nothing will be the same. Let's get into it. The skies above Cedar Ridge had a way of turning on you. One minute, they stretched out endless and blue over the wheat fields and pine-covered slopes. The next, they boiled dark and low, like something ancient had stirred beneath the mountains, waking with a growl. Caleb Ryder felt the change before he saw it. There was a hush that swept the valley, a stillness that made the birds stop singing and the animals hunker low. The air got tight in your chest, like it had weight. Caleb had lived enough lives to know the warning signs. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. From the cockpit of his weathered Piper Pawnee, Caleb tapped the dash like a man trying to reassure a faithful dog. "Easy, girl," he murmured. His voice, roughened by smoke and solitude, barely rose above the hum of the propeller. He adjusted his flight path, circling the final perimeter of his property. The wide stretch of wheat fields below shimmered gold beneath the early evening sun, but beyond the ridge, black clouds had started clawing their way down the sky. Cedar Ridge Municipal, this is Dustbird 1, inbound, storm rolling in faster than expected, requesting clearance for early landing. Over. Static. He waited. Cedar Ridge, come in. More static, then silence. He flicked the comm switch off with a grunt. The wind kicked harder now, jostling the light plane as it dipped over a cluster of trees. Lightning pulsed in the distance, jagged veins of white light slashing the clouds. Caleb swore under his breath. He'd been flying this land for years, back when he did fire surveillance runs for the Forest Service, and now for seeding cover crops and spraying organic compost teas. Flying was second nature. It was the ground that haunted him. Memories clung to the soil like soot. Then came the engine sputter. Not just a cough, no. It was the kind of stutter that made your stomach drop and your body go cold. "Don't you dare," he muttered, his hands moving fast, checking the fuel mix, pressure gauges, throttle response. Another sputter. The needle dropped. Caleb scanned the landscape below. He knew every inch of this land, every old fire break, deer trail, and dip in the terrain. A long, abandoned fire strip near the south ravine came into view, just wide enough if he hit it clean. Rain exploded across the windshield like gravel. Wind slammed the plane sideways. He wrestled the yoke, pulling hard left. The trees rushed up at him. For a second, he saw it. Himself, nose-diving into pine and flame. But the wheels caught grass. The tail kicked. He skidded left, right, then stopped, 20 feet from a ravine's edge. The silence afterward was jarring, just the sound of the cooling engine and the distant rumble of thunder. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Still got it," he muttered, unclipping his harness. He slid the canopy open and climbed out into the storm. The rain soaked him instantly, drenching through his flannel shirt and jeans. He adjusted his ball cap and surveyed the plane, battered but not broken. Then something moved. At first, he thought it was an animal, a blur of motion, low to the ground, staggering from the woods. But it was a person, a woman, barefoot, bloodied, her shirt torn across one shoulder, jeans caked in mud. She stumbled 3 steps, then crumpled to her knees at the edge of the brush. Her body folded sideways. Caleb's training kicked in before thought had a chance to argue. He moved fast, boots sliding in the mud as he reached her side. He knelt, checked her pulse, weak but there. Her skin was cold, lips bluish. "Ma'am," he said, touching her shoulder gently, "can you hear me?" She flinched at his touch. Her eyes blinked open for half a second, piercing blue, wild with confusion and pain. "Target coordinates," she whispered, barely audible. "Secure. Mission not over." Then she passed out. Around her neck, glinting beneath the tangled strands of dark, wet hair, was a single chain with dog tags. Caleb slipped them free and held them to the light. Monsieur Duval. He stared at the name, then looked back toward the forest. Whoever she was, she hadn't come from town, and nobody with dog tags just strolled barefoot out of the timber on a night like this. He hoisted her into his arms, light, too light, and started back toward the plane. No way he'd get her inside safely. That left one option: his cabin. Half a mile northwest, through dense brush and a winding trail, built from timber and grit, it had solar panels, a wood stove, and a hand-dug well. Off-grid by design, just the way he liked it. Rain blinded him as he carried her. Thunder rolled so close it felt like the earth was growling. Memories stirred beneath the surface. Men he'd carried before, charred and broken after drops went wrong. He hadn't touched a soul in months. Not since the fire that ended his career. Not since the decision that still woke him at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. Now this. He kicked open the cabin door, brought her inside, and laid her on the couch near the hearth. He moved quickly, stripping off her soaked outer layers, wrapping her in a quilt, starting the fire with practiced speed. Her hands were scraped raw, nails cracked, bruising on her ribs. Whatever she'd been through hadn't been kind. He warmed a towel on the stove and dabbed the blood from her forehead. Under the dirt and grit, she was striking, sharp cheekbones, strong jawline, like someone who didn't scare easy. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Caleb sat in the armchair opposite her, soaked and silent, watching the flames. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. And when the old motion alarm rigged to his barn lit up, just a soft red blink on the shelf, his eyes narrowed. Someone was out there. The storm had brought more than just lightning. Trouble had landed at Cedar Ridge, and this time, it wasn't leaving easy. The storm didn't let up. By the time Caleb Ryder carried the unconscious woman across the muddy clearing, lightning had split the sky a dozen more times, and the dirt trail to his cabin had all but washed out. His boots sank with every step. Thunder clapped above him like the sky was at war with itself. He adjusted his grip on her. She was light. Too light. He could feel the sharp jut of bone through her damp shirt, the tremble in her frame even while unconscious. Whatever she'd been through, it had stripped her down to survival. And judging by the blood crusting her scalp and the way her shoulder hung at a strange angle, survival hadn't come easy. As he reached the edge of the woods, his cabin came into view. A weathered two-story structure built from local pine and stubbornness. No electricity lines, solar panels now obscured by the gloom. The barn loomed beyond it, half concealed by rain and trees. The whole property was quiet, except for the groan of the wind and the distant creak of wet branches. Caleb kicked the front door open with his heel and crossed the threshold. Inside, it smelled of cedar and smoke. The wood stove crackled low in the corner, flames casting orange shadows across the hardwood floor. He laid the woman gently on the old leather couch, grabbing a wool blanket from the armchair to cover her. She stirred. Just a twitch of the fingers. Then, lips parted. "Coordinates," she whispered. "Secure the mission, not over." Her voice was hoarse. Military, he thought immediately. There was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't pleading. It was reporting. Even barely conscious, her instinct was protocol. Caleb glanced at the dog tag still clutched in his hand. Monsieur Duval. He had questions, 100 of them, but now wasn't the time. First, he had to stop the bleeding. He moved fast, pulled the med kit from the kitchen cabinet, filled a bowl with warm water, and returned to find her eyes fluttering open. Those icy blues caught his face, wide and glassy, scanning like a cornered animal. "Hey," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. Just lie still. You hit your head pretty bad." She didn't answer, but she didn't resist either. He cleaned the wound above her temple, then inspected the arm, dislocated, swollen. "Sorry about this," he muttered. He braced her arm, and with one practiced motion, honed long ago in wildfire-based camps, popped it back into place. She jolted, let out a strangled gasp, then she went limp again. Rain hammered the windows. The radio on the shelf next to the fire crackled suddenly, a ghost of signal, gone as quick as it came. Caleb glanced at it, then at the woman. Should he call someone? The sheriff? EMTs? He reached for the handset, paused. Something about the way she looked at him. That instant, before she passed out. The fear wasn't just from pain. It was the kind that came from being hunted. He turned the radio off. Later that night, the storm had dulled to a drizzle. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching the woman sleep. He'd wrapped her arm, cleaned the worst of the cuts. She was stable for now. No sign of infection, thank God, but still no ID aside from the tags. Her clothes were military cut, but nondescript, the kind of gear used in operations no one talked about. Caleb stood, walked back into the living room. Kneeling by her side again, he tucked the blanket closer and noticed something under her collar. He leaned in. A tattoo, faded but clear, a pair of wings cradling a lightning bolt, and beneath it, a number sequence. That wasn't standard military issue, not even special forces. He stepped back, heart thudding. He hadn't seen that mark in years. Not since the fire. Not since the base in Nevada went up in flames, and his old life with it. He barely had time to process the thought when a sudden noise outside shattered the stillness. A sharp creak. Metal against metal. The barn. Caleb grabbed his shotgun from the rack above the door. It was loaded. He moved silently down the porch steps, rain misting against his face. The barn stood maybe 40 yards away, its roof sagging slightly on the east side. He approached slow, boots barely crunching on the wet gravel. Another sound. Something shifted inside. He raised the shotgun. "If you're looking for shelter, you knocked on the wrong door," he called. No answer, just the wind. Then his shadow darted between the stalls. Caleb moved fast, flung the door open, and swept the interior with the barrel. Nothing. Just hay, old tools, and the faint smell of diesel. Then his eyes fell on the floor. Boot prints, large, deep, fresh. And in the mud near the back wall, a black device, palm-sized, with a blinking red light. He picked it up. It was military grade, no markings. But it hummed with encrypted signal, the kind you couldn't pick up on a civilian radio. Caleb turned it over in his hand. He'd seen this before, back when he jumped into wildfires near classified zones. Communications like this didn't belong to the Forest Service. He headed back to the cabin, every step waited. The woman was awake. She sat upright on the couch, one arm cradled, her hair damp against her cheek. Her eyes locked onto the device in his hand before he said a word. "Where did you find that?" Her voice was low, raw, but sharp. "Barn," he said. "Someone left it behind." She looked away, swore under her breath. "Who are you?" Caleb asked. She looked at him long. Then she answered. "Major Marin Duvall, United States Air Force. Unit designation classified. We were on a recovery op. It went sideways." "Recovery?" "A target with stolen tech. Not just military hardware, experimental. Think battlefield AI remote interference systems. Stuff that shouldn't even exist." Caleb didn't speak, just listened. Marin went on, voice steadier now. "Our unit tracked him here, to the border of your county. We were compromised, ambushed. I don't know who made it out. I ran. Next thing I knew, I woke up on your floor." She took a breath. "If someone left that in your barn, you're in this now, whether you like it or not." Caleb studied her, the way her hands never stopped moving, the way her eyes flicked to the door every few seconds. This wasn't panic. This was a soldier calculating options. He nodded slowly. "All right, Major. You rest. We'll talk more in the morning." She gave him a look, not trust, not suspicion, just exhaustion. Then she leaned back into the pillow. Caleb sat back in the chair across the room. He didn't sleep. Outside, the storm was finally easing, but in his gut, he knew something had already landed. Something big, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. Rain drummed the roof of Caleb's cabin like 1,000 fingers tapping to the rhythm of some long-forgotten warning. The old tin panels had withstood 20 years of storms, but tonight they groaned against the wind as if the mountains themselves wanted to speak. Inside, Caleb sat on the edge of his armchair near the wood-burning stove, boots off, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. He hadn't slept, not since carrying that woman, Major Marin Duval, through the storm and laying her out on the old army cot in the spare room. Her dog tags sat on the table in front of him, beside his hunting knife and a loaded .306. The fire cracked softly behind him. Outside, darkness stretched across the ridge, heavy and quiet. He had questions, too many, and no good way to ask them yet. She hadn't stirred since whispering those words. Target coordinates, must secure. Military. No doubt. But this far-off grid, with no ID, a head wound, and more muscle tone than most deputies in town, she wasn't just a soldier, she was something else. Caleb's eyes flicked to the window. The woods beyond his farm weren't just dark, they were hiding something. That sixth sense from his smoke jumper days whispered again, a kind of hum under the skin, the same one he felt before a lightning strike or a crown fire. He stood slowly, grabbed his rifle, and stepped out into the night. The rain had slowed to a mist. Fog clung to the valley like breath on glass. Caleb moved past the barn, his boots silent on the wet grass. Every few steps he paused, listening. Nothing. He was almost ready to turn back when he saw it. A boot print, not his. Pressed deep into the mud behind the barn, facing the direction of the house. Then another. Then nothing. What the hell? He crouched down, fingers tracing the edge of the print. Heavy tread, military style, but not regulation. Something custom. Then something glinted in the mud. Caleb reached down, lifting a small black rectangle from the earth. A radio. Not the kind a hunter would carry. It was matte, military grade, no markings. Broken in two places but still humming softly. He turned the dial. Static burst out. Encrypted. Scrambled frequencies. Caleb's heart kicked. Whoever had dropped this wasn't lost. They were looking for her. Back inside, he laid the radio on the table beside the tags. The fire was burning low, and his coffee had gone cold. As he reached for the kettle, a soft sound stopped him. A cough. Then movement. He grabbed the rifle and stepped to the hallway. The woman, Marin, was sitting upright on the cot, pale, sweating. Her hair was matted to her forehead, but her eyes were sharp now, alert, watching him. He kept the rifle low, not aimed, not yet. "You're awake," he said. She nodded once, slow. Her gaze dropped to the rifle. "You going to shoot me?" "Not unless I have to." She let out a breath. "Good. We don't have time to waste playing cowboy standoffs." Caleb tilted his head. "That so?" She swung her legs off the cot, wobbled, then stood, barefoot but steady. "You found my tags?" He didn't answer. She spotted them on the table anyway. Her jaw tightened. "Look, I don't know who you are, or what happened, but I'm Major Marin Duval, United States Air Force, tasked to a deep ops recovery unit stationed out of Cheyenne Mountain. What happened was an ambush. My unit was scattered. One of our assets went dark." Caleb blinked. That was more than he expected. Marin glanced at the radio. Her voice dropped. "Where did you get that?" "Behind my barn." She picked it up, eyes narrowing. "They're here, already." "Who?" She looked at him, for a long time. Then, "The same people who tried to kill me." The stove crackled as Caleb tossed in more wood. He didn't sit, couldn't. Marin, now cleaned up and wrapped in a flannel jacket that hung loosely on her frame, moved around the room like she still expected the walls to explode. "They're not military," she explained. "At least not anymore. Rogue contractors, private black ops, technically disavowed, funded off books. They were tracking a classified asset, one capable of disrupting battlefield communications from range." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Like a jammer," she smirked. "Like a goddamn ghost. The prototype went missing in a transport mix-up over Wyoming. Last ping led us to this region." She paused. "I was leading the recovery team." Caleb leaned against the wall. "And now you're alone." Her face darkened. "My team didn't make it." Outside, the wind rose again. Caleb crossed his arms. "What does this have to do with me?" Marin fixed her gaze on him. "Because that radio means they're close. and they're tracking signals, which means if you called the cops or posted anything online. I didn't, he said firmly. Good. Because you lost me at Battlefield Ghosts. She didn't smile. I'm serious, she said. This isn't about you, yet, but you found me, which means you're in it now, whether you like it or not. Caleb's jaw tightened. The fire popped behind him. You want to run, he said. No, she replied. I want to fight. There was something in her voice, not fear, resolve, and strangely, it mirrored something Caleb hadn't felt in years, not since the last jump into fire, not since the smoke took 4 of his brothers. He didn't know if he trusted her, not fully, but he knew this much. Someone was hunting her, and they weren't going to stop at the tree line. He glanced at the old barn. He had a plan, not much of one, but enough to start. You stay here, he said. Why? Because I'm going to the back ridge, gonna check for more boot prints. I'm coming with you. You can barely stand. She stepped closer. You need me more than I need rest. They locked eyes. It was the first moment of understanding between them. Not peace, but recognition. 2 people who'd seen the worst of the world and were still standing. They moved out into the dark, side by side, the mountain air cold and full of old secrets. Behind them, the storm wasn't over. It was just catching its breath. The morning after the firefight in the wheat field was wet and heavy with fog. A low mist clung to the earth, draping Cedar Ridge like a wool blanket. From the porch of his cabin, Caleb Ryder stood barefoot, coffee in hand, listening to the silence. Not peace. No, peace had a different tone. This silence had a hum to it, watchful, waiting, almost too still. Inside, Maren Duval was already awake, seated at the kitchen table with a battered notebook in front of her. Her dog tags lay beside it, glinting dully in the morning light. Caleb could feel the shift in her energy. Yesterday, she was hurt and hunted. Today, she looked like she'd put her uniform back on, even if only in her head. He stepped back inside, the door creaking slightly behind him. You sleep at all? He asked. Maren looked up, face tired but sharp. Some. Enough. You said last night you were part of a recovery unit. What the hell kind of recovery sends men with military-grade radios and suppressors into wheat fields? She didn't flinch. The kind that involves black market tech with the power to turn drone fleets against their own operators. Caleb blinked. You're kidding. I wish. The tech is small, a prototype. Compact, low profile, and extremely illegal. We call it a WISP unit, wireless interference signal platform. She slid the notebook toward him. Inside were diagrams, field notes, timestamps. Caleb skimmed it and shook his head. And it's here? On my land? Not exactly, Maren said, but it was supposed to be transported through this region. Then the convoy went dark. GPS trackers died. Last ping was somewhere south of here, near the ridge. My team tried to intercept, but we walked into an ambush. We lost the signal. We lost men. And we lost the WISP. Caleb exhaled hard, leaning on the back of a chair. You think they brought it here? I think they used your land as a pass-through or a drop zone, maybe more. Whoever they are, they knew enough to chase me through the woods and try to take me last night. They're not random. They're trained. Caleb looked down at his calloused hands. So, what do we do? Maren shut the notebook. Her voice hardened. We make this place a fortress. By noon, the Ryder farm looked more like a backwoods outpost. Caleb's barn, usually a sanctuary of tools and tractor parts, had been converted into a rudimentary operations center. Maren found lengths of rebar, old radio antennae, and a buried spool of coaxial cable near the shed. She fashioned a crude detection net, a system of pressure wires and motion sensors made from scavenged farm equipment. Where'd you learn this? Caleb asked, holding a coil of wire. 4 tours overseas, and a year embedded with DARPA field ops. You learn how to improvise. They set the perimeter wide, far beyond the cabin, deep into the pine rows where Caleb rarely walked. Every trail, every fence post, was repurposed into a trigger point or signal wire. Caleb had never realized how defensible his land was until now, how isolated, How perfect for disappearing. And someone else had realized it too. That afternoon, as they checked the southern boundary, a dust trail rose in the distance. Caleb squinted toward Town Road. "Vehicle," he said. Marin unslung her binoculars. "Government issue, Chevy Suburban. No plates. Tinted." They watched it creep slowly down the gravel path near the far fence line. The vehicle paused, engine humming, then pulled a slow U-turn and vanished. Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're looking." Inside the cabin, Marin pulled up satellite maps from a burner tablet she'd kept dry in her rucksack. "If I were them, I'd send scouts, probe the area, gather intel. The next strike won't be a warning shot." Caleb nodded. "Then we need to make it count." They spent the evening reinforcing the barn with steel braces, hidden sightlines, and fire exits. Caleb unearthed old fire shelters, smoke jumper kits, even a handheld flare gun that still worked. Tools from his past, now suddenly relevant again. "You were a smoke jumper," Marin said that night, watching him from the workbench. "Yeah, until—" He trailed off, tightening a bolt. "Until I wasn't." "What happened?" He hesitated, then, "I made a call. Thought I could outrun a crown fire with 4 men behind me. Wind shifted. I lost 2. Marin didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was gentle. "Sometimes the fire chooses, not the man." That night, they slept in shifts. Caleb on the old couch by the fireplace, Marin near the door, a sidearm under her hand. Rain tapped against the windows like fingers, and outside, in the trees, just past the perimeter wire, something watched. Just before dawn, the tripwire snapped. A soft metallic ping cracked through the stillness. Caleb was on his feet in seconds, grabbing the flare gun and a crowbar. Marin was already moving, low and fast. "North field, motion sensor. Someone's testing us." They reached the barn door and peered out. Nothing but mist. Then a rustle to the left. Caleb raised the flare gun and fired. The sky lit red. For a heartbeat, they saw him. A figure in dark gear, crouched just beyond the tree line. He darted away, radio pressed to his mouth. "Go!" Marin yelled, chasing him through the field. They didn't catch him, but in the mud where he'd fallen, they found something. A sleek black radio, military grade, no markings, still warm. Marin picked it up, mouth tightening. He was transmitting. To who? Someone close, and someone coming. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the farm no longer felt like a quiet corner of nowhere. It felt like a last stand waiting to happen. Caleb looked at the tool shed, now turned into a weapons locker, the barn, rigged for defense, and Marin Duval, standing there with mud on her boots and fire in her eyes. He'd built this place to escape the world. Now the world had found him again. "You're in this now, Caleb," she said, voice low, "whether you like it or not." He looked back at the hills, remembering the fire, remembering what it felt like to run toward the heat, not away. "I like it just fine," he said. The next morning broke sharp and cold, the kind of crisp that made your lungs sting when you breathed in too deep. Fog clung low over the wheat field like a second skin, coiling between fence posts and cattle trails. Caleb stood on his porch with a chipped mug of black coffee, his flannel shirt unbuttoned over a thermal, and eyes locked on the line of trees to the west. Something had shifted. Again. Ever since the storm, the land didn't feel quite like his anymore. It wasn't just that he'd crash-landed a plane or found a half-dead woman with military tags in the ravine. It was a tension in the air, a static hum, like right before a forest fire jumped the line. Inside the cabin, Marin Duval stirred. She hadn't said much since waking fully the previous night, but Caleb saw it in her eyes. She wasn't just recovering. She was recalculating, measuring the risk of staying or running. She hadn't run yet. That told him plenty. He went back in, leaving the door open behind him. "Got some extra fencing down over near the cattle line," he said casually, setting her a plate of eggs and venison sausage. "If you're up to it, you could help spot weak boards." Marin didn't look up. "I know you're testing me." Caleb leaned against the counter. "Wouldn't blame me, would you?" She shook her head once. "I'll help." It wasn't until mid-morning that the knock came. 3 short raps, too even to be a neighbor, and too firm to be a salesman. Caleb opened the door slow, hand just behind the frame where the 30-30 was leaned. A man stood at the steps, a little older than him, lean in the way ex-military men tend to be, dressed in denim and a patched Carhartt jacket. Dust on his boots, a wide-brimmed hat shading his face. But Caleb clocked the scar first, a smooth, silvered line that ran from the man's jaw to the corner of his eye. "Morning," the man said easily, offering a slow nod. "Heard you might need some help with your eastern fence line. I'm Eli." Eli Ward. Caleb didn't move. "I didn't put out any calls." "No, sir," the man said, grinning. "But out here, word travels faster than cell towers. Old man Harris saw your plane limp in during the storm, said you might have work." That wasn't a lie. Harris did love to talk. "Where you from?" Caleb asked. "Originally, Wyoming, but I've been drifting." Caleb studied the boots, not Montana mud. The man had walked in recently, probably parked down the slope, off the main road. "I work alone," Caleb said. Eli just nodded like he expected it. "Suit yourself. Figured I'd offer." He tipped his hat and turned back down the path. Maren watched from the window, lips pressed tight. "That's him," she said. Caleb turned. "You're sure?" She didn't blink. His file said the scar was from a car bomb in Tikrit. They never recovered the body. That's why he got dropped from the roster. But that's him. Caleb looked back outside. The man was gone. Fast. Too fast for someone casually walking back to a truck. They didn't speak for a few minutes. Caleb pulled the 30-30 from the doorway and checked the chamber. "You said your mission went sideways," he said finally. "You never said who made it go that way." Maren sat down on the bench, elbows on her knees. "We were extracting a rogue contractor. He'd gone dark after stealing proprietary military drone schematics. Real cutting-edge stuff. Remote interference, autonomous strike capabilities, blackout cloaking. We were supposed to bring him in, clean." She exhaled sharply. "Someone tipped him off. My team was ambushed. I was the only one who made it out." Caleb rubbed his jaw. "And you think he's here?" "I think he's been watching, maybe longer than we knew." That night, Caleb walked the perimeter again. Not just the fence, every access point, every old hunting path, every dry creek bed. And that's when he saw it, half buried in the mud beneath a cedar tree. A black rectangular radio, military grade, unmarked. Still damp from the previous rain, but it had been left recently. He brought it inside, laid it on the table between them. Maren examined it, fingers brushing over the casing. "This is shortwave encrypted," she muttered. "This isn't field issue, it's command grade." They stared at it in silence. Then the receiver popped, a burst of static, and then, "Confirm elevation at grid 97. Package en route. Check for interference. Repeat. Check for..." The voice cut off. Caleb stared at Maren. That was close. She was already on her feet. "They're triangulating us." He grabbed the keys off the hook. "We've got 30 minutes, tops." She paused. "To do what?" Caleb looked out the window. The moon was half up, casting faint silver over the fields. To become ghosts. The next 2 hours were all motion. Caleb worked like a man back in a jumpsuit, running toward a wildfire. He buried the radio in a metal lockbox, hid it under the root cellar, moved supplies, checked gear. Maren stripped down every trace of her presence. Clothes burned, fingerprints wiped. She set motion sensors around the barn, made from modified trail cams. Caleb didn't ask where she learned that. The silence between them was different now, not suspicious, but sharpened, like they both understood the weight of what they were in. They set up decoys, an old pair of boots filled with sand, propped beside the barn. Maren helped him rig a heat signature pad from copper wire and an old solar inverter to mislead thermal scans. By midnight, the wind had picked up. The coyotes were silent, and then they saw the red dot. It moved slowly across the barn wall, laser sight. Caleb raised the rifle. Maren pulled him back. "It's a warning. They're watching, but they're not ready to breach." Caleb clenched his jaw. "Then we stay ready." Maren nodded, her hand tightening on the sidearm she hadn't shown him until now. The storm was behind them, but something far worse had just begun. and Cedar Ridge wasn't just a farm anymore, it was a target. The storm had passed, but the tension hadn't. The next morning came gray and heavy, like the sky had forgotten how to let in the sun. Fog rolled over the hills of Cedar Ridge like smoke, and Caleb Ryder stood on the porch of his cabin, sipping black coffee as he watched the day struggle to begin. He hadn't slept much. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside had set his nerves on edge. Inside, Maren Duval moved with the slow, calculating grace of someone trained to make silence a survival skill. Her wounds were scabbing over now, but her posture was taut, her eyes sharp. She hadn't said much since the night before, but Caleb could tell she was thinking, planning, remembering. He poured her a mug without asking. She took it with a nod, sat across from him at the table, made from reclaimed barnwood. "The radio?" she asked. He shook his head. "Still fried from the storm. I can try and get the backup going, but it only pulls in local." "Might be enough," she said, her voice low. They drank in silence, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just tense, like something was pressing in from the edges of the forest, just beyond sight. Maren finally set her mug down. "There was a drone in the sky last night." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Infrared sweep. I saw it in the tree line. They're narrowing in." Caleb glanced toward the barn. "Think they know we're here?" She leaned back, exhaled. "If they didn't last night, they will soon." He didn't answer. Instead, he finished his coffee, stood, and motioned toward the door. "We'd better walk the perimeter. I've got motion sensors along the fence. You show me how to patch them into your gear." She gave a faint smile, the first he'd seen. It was more of a twitch than a curve, but it made her look almost human for a second. They spent the next 2 hours rigging up tripwires, syncing old trail cams with Maren's decrypted interface, and mapping fallback points in case they needed to run. Caleb marveled at how methodical she was, every move built on muscle memory, every decision loaded with weight. By midday, they were back inside. Caleb fixed sandwiches. Maren studied a laminated topo map he'd pulled from a filing cabinet. "Here," she said, pointing to the north ridge. "High elevation, clear line of sight. If they come again, that's where they'll start." He nodded, mouth full. "That's also where my granddad's lookout used to be, before he tore it down. There's still some structure up there." Maren glanced at him, eyes narrowing. "You ever think about being a soldier?" He shook his head. "I fought wildfires, dropped into hell with nothing but a shovel and adrenaline. That was enough war for me." She studied him. "Still is." They shared another moment of silence. Then a low boom. Both of them froze. It came again, a rumble that shook the windows. "That's the wheat field," Caleb muttered, bolting upright. He grabbed his old smoke jumper jacket off the hook, a relic from another life. Maren was already moving, stuffing her pistol into a holster under her hoodie. By the time they reached the south edge of the property, the air was thick with smoke. The wheat field was ablaze. Flames licked up golden stalks, turning the late summer crop into a sea of orange. The fire wasn't natural. Caleb saw the black scorch marks where incendiary charges had been placed. He didn't need to say it. Maren already knew. "Diversion," she said. "They want to pull you away from the cabin." He glanced back at the tree line. "You think they're going after the barn? Or me?" Without another word, they split. Caleb dashed toward the fire, instincts taking over. He grabbed an old fire rake from the shed and went to work cutting a brake line. It was like stepping back into the past, smoke in his lungs, sweat on his brow, the roar of fire all around. His heart pounded, but he felt something else too. A rush he hadn't felt since his last jump. God help him, it felt good. Back at the house, Maren moved like a shadow through the brush. She reached the side door just as it swung open. 2 men, black tactical gear, silencers. She dropped one with a shot to the leg, then pivoted and slammed the second into the wall. They fought hard. These weren't amateurs. She took a hit to the ribs, countered with a headbutt, then sent the attacker crashing through the kitchen table. The man groaned, unconscious. From outside, another sound, a groan. Caleb stumbled in, face soot-smeared. "One more," he panted. "Caught him by the silo. He's tied up." The man was middle-aged, scarred, eyes cold. "The payload," he muttered as Maren tightened the ropes. Already en route. You're too late. Marin stiffened. Caleb looked between them. What payload? Marin didn't speak for a long moment. Then, it's not just about me anymore, she said. It never was. She opened her pack, pulled out a metal case, and unlocked it. Inside were files, photos, and one small black drive. She held it up. This is what I found, before the mission went south. She slid the drive into Caleb's laptop, decrypted it. The screen came alive with schematics, autonomous drones, targeting software, battlefield simulations, and GPS overlays of his land. They buried something here, she said quietly. Back during the Cold War, and now someone's trying to get it back. Caleb felt the weight of it settle on his chest, his farm, his family's land. It wasn't just soil and wheat. It was a target, and the war had already begun. The morning after the fire, the wind smelled like scorched wheat and old ghosts. Caleb stood at the edge of the southern field, boots sunk in the blackened earth. The fire line had held, but just barely. Long tendrils of smoke still curled from the charred remnants of the harvest, rising into a pale, bruised sky. The damage wasn't total, but it was bad. Maybe 60% of the wheat was gone, months of sweat and planning, wiped out in minutes by someone else's war. And yet, Caleb didn't feel anger, not yet. What he felt was colder, heavier, the kind of weight that didn't burn away with flame. He felt hunted. Behind him, Marin crouched beside the silo, checking the bindings on the man they'd captured. Middle-aged, square jaw, wearing black tactical gear, and a grimace that hadn't left his face since they'd dragged him out of the field. He hadn't said another word since the payload's already en route, but the look in his eyes said he knew they were too late to stop it. Nothing on him, Marin muttered. No ID, just this. She held up a wristwatch, sleek and matte black, with no visible face. Encrypted communications. I've seen these used by deep recon teams, military contractors, off books. Caleb knelt beside her, wiped sweat from his forehead with a soot-streaked sleeve. So, who is he? Marin shook her head. Doesn't matter, it's what he said that we need to worry about. Caleb gestured toward the barn, where they'd set up a makeshift operations table from his old tool bench. Then let's figure out what he meant. Inside, they unrolled maps, spread out files, and powered up Caleb's laptop. Marin inserted the black drive she'd recovered, military schematics, encrypted overlays, sensor logs. She moved fast, typing in command lines that looked like gibberish to Caleb, but were clearly muscle memory to her. She decrypted more images, satellite shots from years ago, some marked with red circles and heat maps, others with what looked like construction blueprints. But it was one image in particular that made her stop cold, an aerial shot of Caleb's land, the southern slope, the same stretch he'd never managed to plow, not because of poor soil, but because of stone, too much rock. That was the excuse his grandfather always gave, but the image showed more than rocks. It showed a structure buried beneath the earth, a crosshatch of concrete and steel beneath the topsoil, like an underground bunker or a reinforced hangar. The GPS coordinates matched exactly with the edge of the wheat field, the edge that had caught fire first. They were drawing us away from this, Marin murmured. Caleb leaned closer. I always figured that part of the land was just bad for planting. My granddad used to say the glacier left rocks too big for any plow. Marin tapped the blueprint overlay. Your grandfather knew, maybe not everything, but he knew enough to stay away. Look at this. Cold War-era airstrip specs, emergency drop zone, hidden from satellite reconnaissance. There's even a ventilation shaft under that old cedar tree line. Caleb narrowed his eyes. You're telling me my family's been living on top of a secret military bunker and never knew? Marin didn't answer right away. I'm telling you, your land was chosen for a reason. She pulled a second file from the drive, a field report with her signature, and the words, Operation Raven Threshold, classified. Below it, a short mission log, asset located, drone cache suspected, visual confirmation pending. I wasn't just sent to recover stolen data, she said. My team was sent to verify a theory, that a Cold War prototype, never decommissioned properly, was buried out here, something designed before the Geneva Protocols kicked in, autonomous warfare systems, self-targeting, self-replicating if supplied the right materials. Caleb stared at her, stunned. You're saying there's a machine buried on my land that can fight wars by itself? Merrin nodded. Not just fight, adapt, learn. It was shelved because of ethical concerns. Never supposed to be deployed, but someone resurrected the project, and they want that prototype. He backed away from the table, hands on his hips, eyes sweeping the beams of his barn. This is too much, he muttered. This is my land, my family's land. This is supposed to be a place for healing, not a goddamn battlefield. Merrin stood slowly. I know, but you have to understand, this isn't just about land anymore. That tech could destabilize entire regions if it falls into the wrong hands. Caleb turned, facing her. His voice was low, but hard. What if it's already in the wrong hands? She didn't have an answer. They returned to the fire zone by late afternoon. The air was clearing now, but Caleb could smell something off. Not just the usual burn, something metallic, something that didn't belong. Near the tree line, under a collapsed patch of wheat, they found it. A steel hatch, barely visible beneath the ash and scorched stalks. It looked like a rusted storm drain, but the hinges were military grade, sealed with a biometric scanner that hadn't seen use in decades. Caleb crouched, ran a finger along the edge. My granddad used to stack hay bales here, he whispered. Merrin knelt beside him. Maybe he was trying to protect something. She pulled out a small black device from her jacket, something between a USB stick and a lockpick. I can bypass this, she said. Might take a while, might trigger alarms. Caleb stood, scanning the ridge. Then we'd better do it fast, because I've got a feeling our friends from last night aren't done yet. They worked quickly, Merrin on the hatch, Caleb watching the tree line with his shotgun resting across his knees. And then, it clicked. The hatch unlocked with a soft hydraulic sigh. Beneath, a ladder descended into darkness. Cool air wafted up, carrying the scent of oil, metal, and something older, something sealed away too long. Caleb clicked on his flashlight. You ever go first? Merrin gave a half smile. Always. She climbed down. He followed. The ladder opened into a corridor, concrete walls lined with yellowed schematics, faded U.S. Air Force emblems, and blinking red indicator lights that still pulsed, faint but alive. And there it was. At the center of a chamber, like something from a bad sci-fi movie, sat a pod-shaped machine, sleek, angular, and quiet. It didn't move, didn't hum, but it felt awake. Merrin approached cautiously, reading data on a nearby console. This isn't just a prototype, it's a command unit, capable of deploying autonomous drone swarms within a 200-mile radius. Caleb's mouth went dry. You saying it could launch an attack from here? Not just launch, she said. It could learn from the attack. Record, adapt, redeploy. Every strike it makes becomes part of its next plan. He stared at the machine, at the thing buried beneath the soil of his family's legacy. I don't want this here, he said. I don't either, she replied. But now that we've found it, we have to decide, protect it, or destroy it. Caleb looked at her, then back at the machine. For a moment, silence reigned, except for the slow, rhythmic pulse of those red lights. This wasn't just his farm anymore. It was ground zero, and there was no turning back now. The hatch slammed shut behind them with a heavy, echoing thud that vibrated through Caleb Ryder's spine like a war drum. For a long minute, neither he nor Merrin said a word. The glow of red safety lights lined the walls like sentries, painting shadows that danced like ghosts across decades-old concrete. The bunker was a time capsule, a war machine, frozen in hibernation. But now that they'd opened it, something inside felt awake. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling. Merrin moved quickly, her boots scuffing against the grated floor as she swept the chamber with her firearm. It's stable, she said, her voice clipped. The core's offline, no residual heat. The drone interface is intact but dormant. We got lucky. Lucky's not the word I'd use, Caleb muttered. He stepped forward, gazing at the central pod, sleek, 6 feet long, vaguely oval, like the husk of a wasp. Even without power, it hummed with menace. Merrin approached a console built into the wall. Her fingers moved swiftly over dusty keys. The screen blinked to life with a line of code that made her lips press into a thin line. "It pinged something," she said. "The moment we opened the hatch, a dormant uplink tried to connect. It's offline now, but if someone was listening, they know it's active." Caleb exhaled, voice tight. "We need to bury this thing. Now, before they come back." "We do more than that," Marin replied. "We destroy it." But they never got the chance. A crackle sounded over Marin's radio, a static burst followed by a low voice. "Caleb, it's Eli. I think we should talk." Caleb froze. Marin stared at him. "You didn't tell me Eli Ward had your number." "He doesn't," Caleb said, eyes narrowing, "which means he hacked the line." They climbed out of the bunker with urgency, replacing the hatch and kicking dirt over it as best they could. Above ground, the sun was setting in streaks of blood orange and indigo, and the temperature had dropped like the land itself was holding its breath. At the edge of the barn, a black SUV idled. Eli Ward stood beside it, flannel shirt, faded jeans, hands too clean for a man claiming to fix fences. But he wasn't alone. 3 men stood behind him. 2 wore dark jackets and tactical vests. The third, a woman in a business suit, held a sleek tablet and the dead-eyed calm of someone who never got their shoes muddy. "Evening," Eli said, voice smooth. "Heard you ran into some trouble, fires, trespassers, thought I'd check in." Marin stepped forward. "You mean send in a hit squad to torch the field and try to abduct me?" "Now hold on," Eli said, raising both palms. "Nobody said anything about abduction. Things got out of hand, miscommunication. I'm here to offer a solution." The woman in the suit spoke. "Mr. Ryder, Ms. Duvall, we represent a special interest group with a mandate to recover lost military property. We understand you've uncovered a dormant asset on this property." Caleb stiffened. "Dormant asset is a hell of a way to say weaponized drone hive." She didn't blink. "We're authorized to offer you immunity, full legal indemnity, and financial compensation in exchange for your cooperation." "And if we say no?" Marin asked. The woman smiled. "Then we assume a threat classification and proceed accordingly." Eli stepped in again, gesturing with practiced ease. "Come on, Caleb. You don't need this heat. You give them the hardware, they clean up, you go back to planting carrots and selling eggs at the county market. No harm, no foul." Caleb looked past him at the SUV. Its rear door was cracked. Inside, he saw a weapon case, sniper stock visible, barrel gleaming. "That easy, huh?" Caleb said slowly. "And you'll just leave us alone." Scout's honor. But Caleb had been a smoke jumper. He knew how fast fire could spread when people lied to themselves about control. He scratched his beard. "Give me 5 minutes. I'll bring the drive and show you where it is." Eli grinned. "Smart move." Caleb turned, headed for the barn. Inside, Marin was waiting. "You're not giving them anything," she said. "Nope." "Then what are you doing?" Caleb walked to the old toolbox, pulled out 2 detonators, giving them the fireworks show they came for. They moved fast. Caleb had placed small demolition charges during the night, paranoid instincts kicking in after the fire. The old hangar beneath the soil, the one housing the prototype, had weak points. Support columns exposed through frost cracks, enough to bring the ceiling down. "Once we light this," he said, handing Marin the trigger, "we run, back route. Old irrigation tunnel down by the cattle run, brings us out by the creek bed." She looked at him. "You sure about this?" "Only thing I've been sure of all year." Back outside, he returned to the group, hands empty. "It's in the hangar," he said. "I opened it up. Power's down, but the drive has all the specs. You want it, it's yours." Eli eyed him. "You didn't bring it?" "Didn't want to walk through a field carrying classified hardware with trigger-happy suits." Eli nodded, turned to the others. "Give us a minute, we'll check it out." They crossed the field together. Eli, the woman, 2 armed men, toward the hatch. Caleb walked with them until he reached the edge. Then he stopped and hit the switch. The explosion was sharp and surgical. The ground buckled. A fireball bloomed like a second sun. Dirt and flame roared skyward. The hangar collapsed inward with a scream of steel, burying the drone, the uplink, and everything it touched. Chaos erupted. Eli dove. One of the men opened fire. Marn returned cover from the tree line. Caleb grabbed her hand and they ran, ducking into the brush, diving down the cattle slope into the old tunnel. Bullets snapped over their heads. Dirt sprayed, but they didn't stop running. Caleb gritted his teeth against the pain in his shoulder. A graze, maybe worse. Marin's arm steadied him as they disappeared into darkness. Behind them, the land burned. The war they didn't start, they had just set ablaze. The sterile white walls of the Air Force Field Hospital were a far cry from the wood-paneled quiet of Caleb Ryder's cabin. The hum of fluorescent lights, the distant beeping of monitors, the faint antiseptic tang in the air. None of it felt real. But then again, nothing had felt real since the firefight by the hidden hangar, the flash of gunfire, and the searing white pain as a bullet tore through Caleb's shoulder. He was alive. That much he knew. Barely. His first full memory was the slanted ceiling, unfamiliar faces in camo, and Marin's voice cutting through the haze. He's stable. We got him just in time. Now, lying flat on the too-clean hospital bed, with his arm bound in gauze and his ribs aching with every breath, Caleb blinked against the overhead lights. There was a chair next to his bed, empty, but not for long. The door opened with a soft hiss. Marin Duval stepped in, no longer in muddy jeans or a hoodie smeared with sweat and gunpowder. She wore her uniform now, dark blue Air Force dress, name patch crisp, boots polished to a mirror shine. Her hair was tied back neatly, though the faint bruise along her temple hadn't faded. She looked like a soldier again. And yet, something in her eyes softened when she saw he was awake. "Hey," she said, her voice gentler than he remembered. "Hey, yourself," he rasped. His throat felt like gravel. "Nice digs." She pulled up the chair and sat beside him. "You scared the hell out of me, Caleb." He gave a crooked smile. "Guess I still know how to make an impression." She didn't laugh. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and wrapped in gauze. His lucky token, a flattened smoke jumper tag burned at the edges. He always carried it on a chain under his shirt. "You were clutching this," she said, "even unconscious." "Never let it go," he said, "even when I wanted to." Marin nodded slowly, then turned serious. "They stabilized you 2 days ago. You've been drifting in and out." Caleb shifted, winced. 2 days. "You're at a secure military medical facility, technically off the books. Most folks don't even know this place exists." He raised an eyebrow. "Why me?" A knock at the door interrupted them. A tall man in full-dress blues entered, chest lined with medals, hair silver at the temples. He moved with the quiet authority of someone used to commanding entire bases. "Major Duval," the man said. "May I speak with Mr. Ryder?" "Of course, Colonel." Marin stood. "I'll be right outside." The colonel waited until she closed the door behind her, then took her seat. "Mr. Ryder, I'm Colonel James Travers. I command the 415th Strategic Defense Command. Let me begin by offering my personal thanks." Caleb blinked. "For what, exactly?" "Getting shot on my own land?" Travers smiled thinly. "For preventing a breach of national security so sensitive, most of Congress doesn't even have clearance for it." Caleb shook his head. "I didn't do it for medals." "Good," Travers said, "because there won't be any." He leaned forward. "The incident on your property never happened. Not officially. The names of the men who attacked you will not be entered into any court docket. The technology you and Major Duval protected will be relocated and sealed under Level 7 clearance." Caleb frowned. "And me?" Travers pulled out a slim folder and laid it on the bed. "That depends on what you want. You now own a piece of land the Department of Defense has had its eye on for decades. We'd like to lease it, legally. On paper, it will be used as a research hub for advanced agricultural drone testing. Public records will show a cooperative partnership." "But behind the curtain?" "We continue our R&D in a controlled environment, with your oversight. Nothing moves without your sign-off. You get federal funding. We get our security." Caleb studied the folder. "So I become a front." Travers didn't flinch. "You become a partner, one with significant autonomy. Your land remains your land, but it also becomes something more." Caleb thought of the ravine, the buried hangar, the files Marin decrypted, all the things he never asked to be part of. I have conditions, Caleb said. Travers tilted his head. I'm listening. No suits on my land unless invited. No black choppers, no unannounced visits. You operate on my timetable, or not at all. Travers nodded once. Agreed. Anything else? I want Marin assigned as liaison. Civilian role, full clearance. That gave the colonel pause. That might be trickier. Then you can find someone else's wheat field. Travers studied him for a long moment. Then he stood. I'll make the arrangements. When he left, Marin returned. What did you tell him? She asked. Caleb looked out the window. Beyond the trees, the mountains stood tall and quiet, as if none of this had touched them. That I want you sticking around, he said. She didn't reply at first. Then she leaned over, kissed his forehead. Good, she whispered, because I wasn't going anywhere. 2 weeks later, Caleb stood at the edge of his north field, arm still in a sling, watching as a solar-powered rover zipped between rows of newly sprouted winter wheat. The base station had gone up quietly, hidden sensors, remote monitoring pods, and a barn that now doubled as a command center. To the townsfolk of Cedar Ridge, it was just Caleb getting ahead of the curve, smart farming they called it, and he let them believe it. Marin had moved into the guest house. Technically a civilian now, her days were spent running simulations, troubleshooting code, and checking the perimeter just a little too often to be casual. At night, they sat on the porch, drank beer, and tried to forget how close they'd come to dying. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't found you in the storm? He asked one night. She sipped her drink. Sometimes. Think we would have met another way? Marin smiled. Fate's got a mean sense of humor, but maybe. He looked at her. I'm glad you were there, even if it damn near killed me. She reached over, squeezed his hand. You saved my life, Caleb. Now we're even. The wind rustled through the wheat. Somewhere in the distance, a drone buzzed faintly, watching, waiting. Caleb didn't fear the storm anymore. He'd already lived through it and come out the other side. The air over Cedar Ridge had changed. It wasn't just the weather, though spring had finally wrestled winter out of the sky. The mornings were soft now, touched with dew and birdsong. The distant slopes still wore caps of snow, but down in the valley, life was blooming. You could feel it in the soil, in the slow rise of the wheat, in the sound of calves bawling in the next pasture over. But the change ran deeper. It was in the quiet hum of the solar panels, newly mounted atop Caleb Ryder's barn. In the way the community looked at him now, in the way he looked at himself. He was no longer the man who kept to himself, no longer just the haunted firefighter with scars he didn't talk about. Caleb stood in his newly rebuilt greenhouse, checking the irrigation sensors. A soft breeze moved through the open panels. Tomatoes, beans, and hardy greens flourished inside, fed by spring light and a new water system designed with help from someone who, just months ago, had fallen into his world like a lightning bolt in the night. Marin Duval. She walked across the field toward him now, clipboard in hand, wearing work boots and a pale blue shirt rolled to the elbows. Her hair was pulled back, no longer in the tight braid of duty, but something softer, civilian, free. You're overdue for a break, farmer, she called out. He grinned, brushed dirt from his hands, and met her halfway. You checking on me, or the perimeter? Both. Old habits die hard. They stood together for a beat, letting the morning settle around them, the birds, the wind, the creak of the barn settling into the day. How's Howard? He asked. Marin smiled. Back at base, Civilian Oversight Division. He says hello, and he still wants to steal your composting design. He can have it, Caleb said, long as he signs a waiver if it blows up. She laughed, and it was real, full of sunlight. They walked back to the farmhouse together, passing new fencing, raised beds, and a small structure near the tree line. A field office, posing as an ag lab, but wired into a secure server. The research partnership between Caleb's land and the federal government was now official, and as far as the public knew, it was a project in regenerative agriculture and rural tech, which it was, and it was also something more. Inside the farmhouse, Mrs. Parker, a retired local teacher, turned Caleb's part-time housekeeper and full-time nosy neighbor, was already laying out lunch. "You both look like you've been up since rooster crow," she said, setting down a bowl of cornbread. "We have," Marin replied. "More coffee then," Parker declared. "And pie. You need pie." As the older woman bustled in the kitchen, Caleb and Marin sat at the table, sunlight spilling across the wood. There were still shadows in both their eyes, but they were no longer the kind that swallowed. They just gave shape to what had been endured. "There's talk of expanding the program," Marin said quietly, "setting up sister sites in other parts of the country. But Cedar Ridge, this place is the heart. It all started here." Caleb nodded slowly, "And we almost lost it." "But we didn't." She reached into her satchel and laid down a small black drive. "This is the only backup," she said. "The full-spec package. We keep this here, under your control." Caleb stared at it for a moment. "You sure?" Marin met his gaze. "You grounded the storm, Caleb. This is where it belongs." He took the drive and stood, walked over to a cabinet built into the old hearth, opened a false panel, revealing a lockbox bolted into the stone. He placed the drive inside, shut it, locked it. When he turned back, Marin was watching him with something behind her eyes that wasn't quite a smile, but something warmer. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Next, like what?" "Next, like a porch swing, a bigger greenhouse, maybe a dog that doesn't scare off the wildlife." Her lips twitched. "You thinking of staying put?" He nodded. "Yeah, for the first time in a long time, this feels like the right place to be, maybe the only place." Outside, the wind shifted again, rustling the wheat. A new season had arrived. Later that night, Caleb stood alone on the ridge where he'd landed his plane months ago, back when the storm nearly took everything. The sky was clear now, full of stars. He could still see the scar in the earth where the Piper had gouged out its path, but grass was growing back. Marin joined him after a while, arms crossed against the cool. "You always brood this long before bed?" He smiled. "Sometimes. Helps me remember." "Remember what?" He glanced at her, at the stars. "That you either get lost in the storm or you learn to fly through." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "And?" she asked. Caleb let out a long breath. "I think I'm flying again." And somewhere in the dark, the wind carried off the last weight he hadn't known he still held. The storm was over, and something better had just begun.